Jessica Reed felt the weight of the 5-carat diamond on her finger, a perfect, tangible symbol of her victory. Tonight was her coronation, the engagement party for her and the city's most brilliant architect, Daniel Harrington. In a room dripping with champagne and success, she was the radiant bride-to-be. His wife Olivia was a ghost of the past, a footnote in their epic love story. Jessica scanned the crowd, her smile a beacon of pride, searching for Daniel. But her triumphant gaze froze when the grand doors swung open. It wasn't a late-arriving guest. It was Olivia Harrington, and she wasn't crying, she was smiling. A slow, deliberate smile that promised not surrender, but utter devastation. In that single moment, the entire room held its breath, and Jessica's perfect future began to shatter like glass. The reflection staring back at Jessica Reed from the full-length mirror was, in her opinion, flawless. The gown, a sheath of liquid silver by a designer whose name was whispered in reverent tones, clung to her body like a second skin. Her hair, the color of rich honey, was swept into an intricate updo from which a few artful tendrils escaped, framing a face defined by high cheekbones and a self-satisfied pout. But the true centerpiece was the ring, a magnificent cushion-cut diamond flanked by 2 smaller stones. It was a star captured and bound to her finger. It was her trophy, her proof of purchase, the deed to a man and a life she had systematically acquired. She turned her hand, watching the stone catch the light of the crystal chandelier in her hotel suite. Each facet seemed to splinter the light into 1,000 tiny rainbows, a dazzling promise of the future. Daniel had impeccable taste. He had chosen the ring just as he had chosen her for her beauty, her fire, and her ability to make him look good. She was the upgrade, the newer, sleeker model that made the original look obsolete. The original, Olivia Harrington. Jessica had never met the woman, but she had constructed a detailed portrait in her mind. Olivia was beige, a beige woman with a beige personality living a beige life in a beige suburban mansion. She was probably sensible, dependable, and utterly soul-crushingly dull. The kind of woman who organized charity bake sales and wore sensible shoes. Jessica pictured her right now, probably curled up on a chintz sofa with a romance novel, blissfully unaware that her husband was publicly cementing his future with another woman. The thought was so deliciously satisfying it made her shiver. A light knock on the suite door pulled her from her reverie. "Come in," she called, her voice smooth as silk. Daniel entered, looking every bit the masterpiece of modern masculinity. His tuxedo was tailored to perfection. His dark hair was impeccably styled, and his smile could disarm armies. He was the prize, and everyone knew it. "There you are," he murmured, his eyes sweeping over her with an appreciative gleam. He closed the distance between them, his hands finding her waist. "You look transcendent." "I feel transcendent," Jessica replied, pressing a kiss to his jaw. "Ready to officially announce to the world that you're all mine." "The world already knows," he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "Tonight is just the formality, a celebration of the inevitable." Jessica loved the way he talked. He spoke in headlines, in declarations. He made their affair sound like a fated epic romance rather than a sordid little secret. For 2 years they had operated in the shadows, stolen weekends, hushed dinners in dimly lit restaurants, carefully coded text messages. Daniel had always insisted on discretion, not for Olivia's feelings, he'd assured her, but for the sake of a clean and amicable divorce. He had business interests intertwined with his father-in-law, a man of considerable influence. Unraveling it all had to be done with surgical precision. "Is she signed?" Jessica asked the one question that still held a sliver of doubt. The divorce papers, the final link to be severed. Daniel's smile didn't falter. "It's being handled, my love. My lawyers are bulldogs. Tonight isn't about the past. It's about our future." He tilted her chin up. "Our engagement party. In the starlight room, with everyone who matters watching. No more secrets. No more hiding." That was all she needed to hear. He led her out of the suite and towards the private elevator that would take them down to the hotel's rooftop ballroom. The Starlight Room was the most exclusive venue in the city, a glass-walled marvel that offered a panoramic view of the glittering skyline. Getting a reservation required a year's notice and a fortune, but for Daniel Harrington, doors simply opened. As they stepped out of the elevator, the low hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses washed over them. The room was packed. Jessica recognized faces from society pages and business journals. There was Gregory Thorne, the venture capitalist, chatting with a senator. There was Maria Petrova, the famously eccentric artist. This wasn't just a party. It was a convergence of power. And they were all here for her and Daniel. She tightened her grip on his arm, her smile widening. This was it. The culmination of 2 years of patience of tolerating his excuses about timing and complications. She had played the long game, and she had won. Daniel guided her through the throng, a conquering hero with his new queen. People turned their eyes, drawn to her, to the ring, to the triumphant couple. "Daniel, my boy." A portly man with a booming voice clapped Daniel on the back. "You look like the cat that got the cream." His eyes flicked to Jessica, appraising and approving. "And I can certainly see why. Walter, you know Jessica Reed," Daniel said smoothly. Jessica offered a dazzling smile. "It's a pleasure, Mr. Jennings." "The pleasure is all mine. Congratulations to you both. A bold move, Harrington. I like it." A bold move. Jessica savored the words. They were acknowledging the coup she had orchestrated. She wasn't some home wrecker. She was a force of nature, a woman who got what she wanted. As Daniel was pulled into another conversation, Jessica's gaze swept the room. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, and in them she saw a mixture of admiration, envy, and curiosity. She was the main event. Her eyes landed on an older, distinguished-looking man standing near the grand piano. He looked vaguely familiar. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. She assumed he was one of Daniel's father's associates. She gave him a small, confident nod, which he did not return. Strange. She dismissed it. Tonight, no one could touch her. She drifted over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city spread below like a carpet of jewels. This was her kingdom now. The penthouse apartment, the summer home in the Hamptons, the endless prestige that came with being Mrs. Daniel Harrington. It was all within her grasp. Olivia could have the beige house and the memories. Jessica was taking the future. She spotted Daniel across the room, deep in conversation with his father, Robert Harrington, a stern, imposing man who had always seemed to disapprove of her. But even he was smiling tonight, or at least his lips were curved into something resembling a smile. It was all falling into place. A waiter offered her a glass of champagne, and she took it, the bubbles dancing on her tongue. She felt effervescent, untouchable. This wasn't just an engagement party. It was a coronation. And she was the queen, resplendent in her silver gown, with her diamond crown sparkling on her hand for all the world to see. Nothing and no one could possibly ruin this perfect, triumphant night. Daniel Harrington navigated the glittering crowd of the Starlight Room with the practiced ease of a predator in his own jungle. He offered a charming smile here, a firm handshake there, his words, a carefully curated blend of bonhomie and business. To the outside world, he was the man of the hour, a visionary architect, celebrating his engagement to a beautiful young woman, his career and personal life ascending in perfect, glorious alignment. Inside, a cold knot of anxiety was tightening in his stomach. He glanced over at Jessica, who was holding court by the windows. She was magnificent, a perfect accessory for the life he was projecting. She believed every word he'd said, swallowed every lie like it was the finest champagne. She believed this party was for them, a grand public declaration. In a way, she was right. It was a declaration, but not the one she was expecting. His life was a house of cards, built on a foundation of his father-in-law's money and Olivia's quiet, unwavering support. The firm Harrington Designs was his name, his vision, but it was Olivia's inheritance that had provided the seed money and her family connections that had opened the first, most important doors. He was the artist, but she, or rather her wealth, was the patron. It was a truth he had long since buried under layers of his own manufactured genius. He had come to believe his own hype, to see her contribution as a mere stepping stone he had long since surpassed. The affair with Jessica had started as a cliché, a dalliance with a hungry, ambitious junior designer on his team. She looked at him with an uncomplicated adoration that Olivia had shed years ago. Olivia looked at him with the clear, knowing eyes of someone who had seen behind the curtain. She knew his flaws, his insecurities, his tendency to cut corners. Jessica saw only the brilliant architect, the powerful man. Her admiration was a drug, and he had become an addict. He'd told himself he was leaving Olivia because the passion was gone, because they had grown into different people. He was a creator, an adventurer. She had become cautious content. But the truth, the ugly secret truth, was that he was leaving her because he was financially ruined. A series of disastrously ambitious projects, a few bad investments in the volatile tech market, and a lifestyle that far outstripped his actual earnings had left him hollowed out. He'd been shuffling money between accounts, taking out secret loans, leveraging the company's assets to cover personal debts. He was a magician of finance, creating the illusion of boundless wealth while teetering on the edge of a black hole. The divorce was his only way out. He had assumed with breathtaking arrogance that he could charm his way through it. He'd envisioned a settlement where he kept the firm, the brand, and a significant chunk of their shared assets, leaving Olivia with the house and a comfortable allowance. He would be free, unencumbered by her family's silent judgment, and financially reset. He would marry the beautiful, adoring Jessica, and his second act would be even more glorious than the first. "Daniel." His father's voice, sharp and laced with its usual disappointment, cut through his thoughts. Robert Harrington had been a federal judge before retirement, and he still carried the weight of the bench in his posture. "Father," Daniel said, forcing a warm smile. "Glad you could make it." "I wouldn't miss it," Robert said, his eyes scanning the room. "Quite a production. Who's footing the bill for all this?" "One of your new clients." "Just a celebration," Daniel said evasively. "Good for the brand." Robert's gaze fell on Jessica. "And she's part of the new brand. She's my future," Daniel said a little too firmly. His father took a slow sip of his whiskey. "A future built on what exactly I spoke to your mother-in-law last week. Helen sounded distressed. The knot in Daniel's stomach cinched tighter. Divorces are always unpleasant, Father. You know that. I also know Olivia, Robert said, his voice low. She is not a hysterical woman. She is precise, methodical. She is in many ways very much like your mother was. You would do well to remember that. Before Daniel could formulate a response, he was saved by the arrival of Mark Chen, a key investor in his latest high-rise project, the Apex Tower. Daniel, what a night, Mark beamed, shaking his hand vigorously. My wife and I were just admiring the view. You really know how to throw a party. Only the best, Mark, Daniel said, his public persona snapping back into place. Glad you could come. I wanted to talk to you about the latest renderings for the penthouse levels. I think you'll be very pleased with the material upgrades. Excellent. That's what I like to hear, Mark said. Things are still on track, I trust. The capital flow is stable. Stable as a rock. Daniel lied, his heart thumping against his ribs. The Apex Tower account was a sieve, and he had been patching it with funds from 2 other projects. It was a high-stakes juggling act, and his arms were getting tired. He just needed the divorce to go through. He needed access to a new line of credit, one that wasn't tied to Olivia's family name. This party, this public display of success and stability, was crucial. He needed investors like Mark to feel confident. He needed the world to see him as a winner. He excused himself and made his way back to Jessica's side, slipping an arm around her waist. She leaned into him, her scent a heady mix of perfume and victory filling his senses. Everything okay, darling? She asked, sensing his momentary tension. Perfect, he whispered, kissing her temple. Just business. Everyone is thrilled for us. She beamed, believing him completely. He looked at her so bright-eyed and beautiful, and felt a pang of something he almost mistook for guilt. She was a pawn in a much larger game, a game she didn't even know he was playing. She thought she was the queen about to checkmate her rival. She had no idea that the entire board was about to be flipped over, and that he was the one who had staked everything on a single, desperate bluff. He scanned the room again, a flicker of genuine fear piercing his carefully constructed armor. The guest list was odd. He'd given Jessica's assistant a list, but Olivia, as part of their amicable separation, had offered to handle the main invitations through her own seasoned social secretary. He had thought it a gesture of goodwill, a sign that she was resigned to the end. Now, seeing the faces in the crowd, he wasn't so sure. There were too many lawyers. He recognized Susan Vance, Olivia's notoriously sharp-witted college roommate, who was now a partner at a top litigation firm. And over by the bar, talking to the senator, was Paul Croft, a forensic accountant known as the Reaper for his ability to unearth financial fraud. Why were they here? A cold sweat prickled the back of his neck. His father's words echoed in his head. She is precise, methodical. This didn't feel like a party. It felt like an arena. And Daniel Harrington was beginning to feel an awful lot like a gladiator who had just realized his sword was made of cardboard. For the first hour, Jessica Reed was floating on a cloud of pure vindication. The congratulations, the admiring glances at her ring, the palpable envy from other women, it was everything she had dreamed of. She was no longer Daniel Harrington's dirty little secret. She was his dazzling future presented to the world on a silver platter in the city's most breathtaking venue. She sipped her champagne, laughed at the appropriate moments, and played the part of the gracious, beautiful fiancée to perfection. But as the second hour began to unfold, a strange sense of dissonance began to creep in, like a single off-key note in an otherwise perfect symphony. It started with the conversations she was trying to join. She approached a small group clustered around Maria Petrova, the artist. "That's a stunning piece you're wearing, Maria," Jessica said, touching her own diamond necklace for emphasis. "A new collection." Maria Petrova turned her heavily lined eyes, giving Jessica a dismissive once-over. "It's a statement on corporate greed," she said flatly before turning back to her companions. "As I was saying, Olivia's new initiative is utterly fearless. A real paradigm shift." Olivia. The name struck Jessica like a tiny pebble, insignificant but annoying. Why were they talking about Olivia at her engagement party? She smiled tightly and moved away. A few minutes later, she tried to engage with Gregory Thorne, the venture capitalist. "Daniel is so excited about the Apex Tower," she began, hoping to sound knowledgeable. "He has such a brilliant vision." Thorne gave her a polite but distant smile. "Daniel's a fine architect. But what Olivia is building is on another level entirely. She has a real gift for structure, both in business and in philanthropy. I've never seen a foundation board come together so quickly. Pure genius." Again. Olivia. It was bizarre. These people were Daniel's colleagues, his associates, his circle. Yet they were all speaking about his soon-to-be ex-wife with a kind of reverence that was deeply unsettling. Jessica had expected at most a few whispers of pity for the poor abandoned wife. Instead, she was hearing praise. Her unease grew. She began to pay closer attention, not to what was being said to her, but to the snippets of conversation she could overhear as she moved through the room. Heard she liquidated the entire art collection. A clean break. No, the firm wasn't a joint asset. It was funded by a trust. Her trust. He must be a fool to lose a woman like Olivia Thorne. Thorne. They were using her maiden name. It was as if the Harrington had already been surgically removed. Jessica's perfect smile began to feel stiff like a mask that was hardening on her face. A chill snaked its way down her spine completely, at odds with the warmth of the crowded room. She looked for Daniel, needing his reassurance, his easy confidence to dispel her growing fears. She found him locked in a tense-looking conversation with his father near the bar. Daniel was gesturing emphatically, a sheen of sweat on his forehead, while Robert Harrington listened with a grim, stony expression. This was not the celebratory father-son chat she would have expected. As she approached, she saw Robert shake his head. Slowly murmur something that looked like, "You've made your bed," and walk away, leaving Daniel standing alone, looking pale and shaken. "Daniel," she said, touching his arm. "Is everything all right?" He flinched, then quickly composed himself, plastering on his signature smile. It didn't quite reach his eyes. "Everything's perfect, my love. My father is just being his usual self. Don't worry about it." But she was worried. The entire atmosphere felt wrong. The music was elegant, the champagne was flowing, but the undercurrent was one of tension, of anticipation. It felt less like a party and more like the unnerving quiet before a storm. Her eyes scanned the guest list again this time, with a more critical eye. She had assumed these were all Daniel's people, but now she was starting to recognize faces from the philanthropic circles Olivia was rumored to move in. There was the editor-in-chief of a major newspaper, a woman Olivia had apparently served on a charity board with. And there were several prominent lawyers, both men and women, none of whom were from Daniel's firm. One of them, a striking woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, seemed to be watching her. It was Susan Vance, the litigator Daniel had once mentioned, was Olivia's best friend from law school. Why would Olivia's best friend be at this party? An engagement party, celebrating the end of her friend's marriage. It made no sense, unless this wasn't what she thought it was. The pieces began to click into place with horrifying speed. The strange praise for Olivia, the use of her maiden name, the presence of her allies, the tense look on Daniel's face, the palpable sense of waiting that hung in the air. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. She felt a sudden, desperate need to flee, to grab Daniel's hand and run from the room before whatever was about to happen could happen. She felt exposed, a fool in a silver dress, standing in a gilded cage she had mistaken for a throne room. The 5-carat diamond on her finger suddenly felt heavy, less like a crown, and more like a shackle. Just then the lights in the room dimmed slightly, and a hush fell over the crowd. Robert Harrington was walking towards the small stage at the front of the room, a microphone in his hand. What? Jessica's blood ran cold. This was it, the moment of the announcement. But as Daniel's father cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping over the assembled guests, he didn't look at Daniel. He didn't look at Jessica. He looked directly towards the grand double doors at the entrance to the ballroom. "Thank you all for coming tonight." Robert began, his voice resonating with judicial authority. "We are here to bear witness to a new beginning, a moment of profound courage and strength. It takes a rare kind of person to transform profound personal disappointment into a powerful public mission." Jessica's mind reeled. Personal disappointment. Public mission. What was he talking about? This was supposed to be about love, about a new life, about her. "And so," Robert Harrington continued, his voice rising, "it gives me the greatest pride to welcome the architect of this entire evening, the founder of a truly transformative new venture, my daughter-in-law, Olivia Thorne Harrington." As he said her name, the grand doors swung open, and there she stood. Time seemed to slow, to thicken like honey. Every eye in the starlight room swiveled towards the entrance. The low hum of conversation ceased, replaced by a collective sharp intake of breath. Jessica felt as if the air had been sucked from her lungs, leaving a painful hollow vacuum. Her entire world, so solid and triumphant just moments before, was tilting on its axis. The woman framed in the doorway was not the beige, mousy creature of Jessica's imagination. She was not crying, she was not broken, and she was certainly not wearing sensible shoes. Olivia Harrington, or Olivia Thorne, as she was apparently now known, was a vision of incandescent power. She wore a tailored jumpsuit in a deep, commanding shade of sapphire blue that made Jessica's shimmering silver gown look frivolous and girlish in comparison. Her dark hair was cut in a sleek, severe bob that framed a face of startling intelligence and composure. Her makeup was minimal but flawless, her only jewelry a pair of simple, elegant diamond studs. She held no purse, her hands were free, her posture radiating an unassailable confidence. But it was her eyes that held the room captive. They were a cool, clear grey, and they swept across the assembled guests with a calm, deliberate authority. There was no pain in them, no hint of the scorned wife. There was only focused purpose and a chilling, unnerving certainty. And then her gaze landed on Jessica. For a heartbeat, their eyes met across the glittering room. Jessica felt pinned by that look, dissected and dismissed in a single, silent moment. In Olivia's eyes she saw not hatred or jealousy, but something far more devastating: pity. It was the look one might give a foolish child who had wandered into a game far too complex for her to understand. Then Olivia's lips curved into a small, controlled smile. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that was not a gesture of warmth, but a weapon being unsheathed. That was the moment Jessica knew. This was never her coronation. It was her execution. As Olivia stepped into the room, a path seemed to clear for her, as if by magic. People didn't just make way. They turned to her, their expressions a mixture of awe and anticipation. She was not an intruder at this party. She was its center of gravity. Jessica turned frantically to Daniel, her mind screaming for an explanation. His face was ashen, a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He looked like a man watching his own life being set on fire. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He was staring at Olivia. His mouth slightly agape, the charismatic architect utterly vanished, replaced by a trapped, panicked boy. "Daniel." "What is this?" Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. "What is going on?" He shook his head, a tiny, helpless gesture. I don't know," he stammered, the lie so transparent it was pathetic. Olivia moved through the room with a serene grace, nodding to guests by name. "Susan, thank you for coming." "Senator, your support means the world." "Paul, I've got those preliminary financials for you." These were her people, her army. And Jessica and Daniel were standing isolated and exposed in the middle of enemy territory. Robert Harrington stepped down from the stage, meeting Olivia halfway. He took her hand and kissed her cheek with genuine affection. "You have their full attention, my dear," he said, his voice full of a pride and respect Jessica had never once heard him use when speaking to his own son. "Thank you, Robert," Olivia replied, her voice calm and clear, easily carrying in the silent room. "For everything." She then turned and walked towards the stage, her every step deliberate and measured. She moved like a queen ascending her throne. The crowd watched, rapt. Jessica felt 100 pairs of eyes glance from Olivia to her, and back again, the unspoken understanding passing through the room like an electric current. They were all in on it. The entire event, the invitations, the guest list, the very name on the reservation for the Starlight Room. It had all been her. Jessica felt a wave of nausea. The champagne in her stomach turned to acid. The beautiful gown felt like a costume for a fool. The diamond on her finger felt like a lead weight dragging her down into a chasm of humiliation. She had walked in here tonight, believing she was the star of the show, the victor writing the final chapter. Now she understood she was nothing more than a prop, a carefully placed piece of bait in Olivia's elaborate, exquisitely cruel trap. As Olivia reached the stage and turned to face the crowd, she took the microphone from the stand. Her cool grey eyes found Daniel in the crowd, and for the first time she addressed him directly, though her voice remained steady and projected for all to hear. "Hello, Daniel," she said, the simple greeting landing with the force of a physical blow. "I'm so glad you could make it. And you brought a guest. How thoughtful." The polite, cutting words hung in the air, dripping with an irony so thick it was suffocating. The public humiliation had begun. And as Olivia looked out at the powerful, influential people she had gathered, Jessica knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this was only the beginning of the demolition. Olivia hadn't come here to reclaim her husband. She had come to bury him. Olivia Thorne stood at the podium, a figure of absolute composure. The Starlight Room was so quiet that the faint, distant sound of a siren on the street below was clearly audible. She held the microphone with a steady hand, her gaze sweeping across the room before settling once more on the frozen figures of Daniel and Jessica. "Good evening, everyone." she began, her voice perfectly modulated, betraying no emotion. I know there may be some confusion. Some of you were invited here tonight under a certain pretext. An engagement party, I believe. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Jessica flinched as if she'd been struck. Let me be clear. There is no engagement. Not tonight. Not ever. Her words were definitive, cutting through the last of Jessica's desperate hopes. She dared a glance at Daniel. He was staring at the floor, his posture crumpled, his handsome face slack with disbelief and dread. He was a deflated effigy of the confident man who had entered the room an hour ago. The truth, Olivia continued, is that I convened this gathering for a much more important announcement. Tonight is not an ending but a beginning. It is the official launch of a project I have been developing for the past year. It's a foundation dedicated to providing financial, legal, and emotional support to women who are navigating the devastating fallout of spousal betrayal and financial fraud. A collective gasp went through the room. The audacity, the sheer pointed brilliance of the move was stunning. She had gathered the city's elite not to witness her humiliation, but to enlist them in a cause born directly from her husband's treachery. She was turning her pain into a platform, her private disaster into a public crusade. Jessica felt the blood drain from her face. Financial fraud. The words echoed in her ears. As if on cue, two massive screens on either side of the stage, previously displaying artistic swirls of light, flickered to life. On them, in stark black and white, appeared a series of documents, bank statements, loan applications, and intricate flow charts. My husband, Daniel Harrington, Olivia said, her voice dropping to a colder, more clinical tone as a laser pointer emerged in her hand, is a gifted architect. He designs beautiful structures. It turns out he is equally gifted at designing fraudulent financial statements. She used the laser pointer to highlight a specific document on the screen. This is a loan application for the Apex Tower project, submitted 3 months ago. It lists as collateral a stock portfolio valued at $7 million. She paused, letting the information sink in. That portfolio belongs to my family trust. Daniel forged my signature to leverage it. It was the last of many, many such forgeries. The room was utterly silent now, the shock palpable. Investors like Mark Chen stared at the screen, their faces a mixture of fury and disbelief. Over the past 3 years, Olivia went on, her voice a relentless, factual drumbeat. Daniel has systematically siphoned over $12 million from his own company, Harrington Designs, and from our personal accounts. He has been running a shell game, using funds from new investors to pay off old debts and to finance a lifestyle and a mistress he could not possibly afford. She clicked a button, and the screen changed to show a spreadsheet. It was a detailed accounting of lavish expenses, a $500,000 lease on a sports car, a $70,000 watch, weekly stays at 5-star hotels, and at the very bottom, an entry that made Jessica's stomach clench violently. Jewelry Cartier, $250,000. Her ring. He had bought her ring, her symbol of victory, with stolen money. It felt like a brand on her skin. Danielle believed that by divorcing me, Olivia explained, her voice devoid of any self-pity, he could secure a settlement that would cover these debts, leaving him free to continue his charade. He underestimated me. He assumed I was the beige, supportive wife who handled the charities while he handled the business. He forgot that before I was Mrs. Harrington, I was Olivia Thorne, and my father did not raise me to be a fool. She looked directly at Daniel, who finally raised his head. His eyes were wide with a desperate, pleading terror. He looked like a trapped animal. The company Harrington Designs, Olivia announced, delivering the killing blow, was established using a seed loan from my trust. A loan that was structured by my very prescient lawyer, with a clause that in the event of dissolution of the marriage due to infidelity, all company assets revert to the lender. Me. As of 9 a.m. this morning, I exercised that clause. Harrington Designs has been dissolved. Its assets are frozen. The company no longer exists. A wave of frantic murmuring erupted. Daniel's partners and employees, scattered throughout the crowd, stared at him in horror. Their jobs, their investments, their futures all gone in a single sentence. As for Daniel himself, Olivia said, her voice softening with a terrifying final calm, a full forensic audit of his activities has been compiled by Mr. Paul Croft over there. She gestured towards the man Jessica had seen earlier, the Reaper. A copy of that audit was delivered to the district attorney's office this afternoon. I believe they will find it very, very interesting. It was a complete and total annihilation, executed with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a general. She had not only exposed him, she had stripped him of his company, his wealth, his reputation, and his freedom, all in one fell swoop in front of everyone who mattered. This is why I have created the Phoenix Foundation. Olivia concluded, her voice regaining its strength. Because women like me, and women with far fewer resources than me, deserve to rise from the ashes of a life burned down by deceit. They deserve justice, and they deserve a new beginning. She looked out at the stunned faces. The donation packets are on your tables. I trust you will all be as generous as you are shocked. Then, her work done, she set down the microphone. She didn't look at Daniel or Jessica again. She simply walked off the stage, where her father and her lawyer, Susan Vance, were waiting for her. The spell was broken, and the room erupted into a cacophony of frantic, urgent conversation. The party was over. The feeding frenzy was about to begin. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Daniel Harrington stood rooted to the spot, a statue of a ruined man in the center of a swirling vortex of his own making. People were not just looking at him. They were staring through him, their faces masks of contempt, fury, and disgust. Mark Chen, the Apex Tower investor, was the first to reach him. "You're finished, Harrington." Chen hissed, his face purple with rage. "My lawyers will be in touch. You'll be lucky if you see the outside of a prison cell in the next 20 years. He didn't wait for a reply, turning on his heel and storming towards the exit, barking into his phone. Others followed. Former partners who had clapped him on the back an hour earlier now shoved past him without a word, their eyes cold. Clients he had schmoozed and charmed now looked at him as if he were a leper. The senator he'd been so proud to host was already halfway out the door. The entire edifice of his life, the respect, the admiration, the power, it had all been a mirage, and Olivia had just turned on the lights. Jessica watched it all paralyzed. The shame was a physical force pressing in on her from all sides. She was inextricably linked to his disgrace, the mistress financed by fraud, the other woman who was just another one of his reckless stolen purchases. The $250,000 ring on her finger felt like it was burning her skin. With a shaking hand, she wrenched it off and shoved it into her clutch. It felt like trying to hide evidence. Finally, Daniel moved. He stumbled towards her, his eyes wild and unfocused. "Jess," he croaked, his voice unrecognizable. "We have to go. We have to get out of here." "Go where, Daniel?" she snapped, the shock finally giving way to a raw, bitter anger. "What just happened? Was any of it true?" "It's a misunderstanding," he mumbled, grabbing her arm. "She's twisting things. She's vindictive. We can fix this." But Jessica was no longer under his spell. The charming, powerful man she thought she loved had vanished, replaced by this weak, stammering fraud. "Fix it, Daniel. She just dismantled your entire life on live television. She had documents. A forensic accountant. She sent it all to the DA. She's bluffing," he insisted, his voice cracking with desperation. But they both knew it was a lie. Olivia Thorne was not a woman who bluffed. Jessica pulled her arm from his grasp. "You lied to me," she said, her voice low and venomous. "You lied about everything. The divorce, the money, this whole night. You let me walk in here like a fool. I did it for us." He pleaded, his facade of control completely shattered. "I just needed more time. You needed her money." Jessica shot back, the ugly truth now painfully clear. "You weren't leaving her for me. You were just trying to find a new life raft because you'd already sunk the first one." Before their argument could escalate further, a calm voice cut through their toxic exchange. "I believe you have something that belongs to the Foundation's asset portfolio." They both turned. Olivia was standing there, flanked by Susan Vance, her lawyer. She was looking pointedly at Jessica's clutch. The message was unmistakable. Jessica's hands trembled as she fumbled with the clasp. The shame was so intense, it felt like a physical illness. She pulled out the massive diamond ring and held it out. Her trophy, her crown. It looked obscene in the light. Olivia didn't take it. Instead, Susan Vance stepped forward and produced a small, velvet-lined evidence bag, holding it open. With a final crushing wave of humiliation, Jessica dropped the ring into the bag. It landed with a soft, final thud. "Thank you for your donation," Olivia said, her voice devoid of any triumph. It was worse. It was pure, indifferent dismissal. She looked at Jessica. Truly looked at her for the first time since her entrance. "A piece of advice," she said, her tone quiet but firm. "When a man tells you his wife doesn't understand him, what he really means is that she understands him perfectly. You would do well to remember that." With that, she turned to Daniel. He shrank under her gaze. "The locks have been changed at the house, Daniel," she stated simply. "Your belongings have been packed and sent to a storage unit. The key is with my lawyer. Any attempt to contact me or my family will be considered a violation of the restraining order that was filed this afternoon." A restraining order. It was the final nail in the coffin. Olivia and Susan then turned and walked away, moving towards the exit, where a crowd of reporters, undoubtedly tipped off by her team, was beginning to gather their cameras, flashing like lightning. Daniel and Jessica were left alone in the wreckage. The music had stopped. Waitstaff were discreetly clearing away the remnants of a party that had become a public execution. The grand starlight room now felt like a cold, empty tomb. Jessica looked at the man beside her. There was nothing left. No charm, no power, no future. He was just a hollow man, a ghost in a well-tailored suit. Without a word, she turned her back on him and walked towards a service exit, desperate to escape the scene of her own immolation. The sound of her foolish, prideful dreams shattering into a million irreparable pieces. 6 months later, the city was still talking about the Night of the Starlight Room Massacre, as the society pages had gleefully dubbed it. It had become a modern legend, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties and business lunches. It was the story of a spectacular downfall and an even more spectacular rebirth. Olivia Thorne's rise was meteoric. The Phoenix Foundation, launched on a wave of scandalous publicity, became an overnight sensation. Donations poured in from wealthy divorcees, sympathetic businessmen and women across the country who saw a reflection of their own struggles in her story. Olivia proved to be a formidable and savvy leader. She appeared on national news programs not as a victim, but as a sharp, articulate advocate for financial literacy and legal reform for women. She was no longer defined by her husband's betrayal. She was defined by her response to it. The sapphire blue jumpsuit she had worn that night was even displayed in a museum exhibit on iconic moments in modern feminism. She had not only risen from the ashes, she had built an empire upon them. Daniel Harrington's fall was just as swift and absolute. The district attorney's office, armed with Paul Croft's meticulous audit, had moved quickly. He was arrested 2 weeks after the party, a pathetic, haggard figure in a rumpled suit, hiding his face from the paparazzi as he was led away in handcuffs. He was facing a mountain of charges for fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. His father, Robert Harrington, had publicly disowned him, refusing to post his bail. He was a pariah, his name synonymous with disgrace. The beautiful structures he had designed now seemed like monuments to a fraud. His trial was set to be the spectacle of the year, but the outcome was a foregone conclusion. His life as he knew it was over. For Jessica Reed, the fallout was a slower, more insidious poison. She wasn't a criminal, merely a fool, and there was no court for foolishness, only the harsh judgment of public opinion. She was fired from her design firm the day after the party the morality clause in her contract swiftly invoked. Her name was toxic. No other firm would touch her. Her friends, the ones who had flocked to her when she was with Daniel, now crossed the street to avoid her. She had been forced to sell her expensive condo and move into a small, nondescript apartment on the far side of town. The silver gown from that night hung in the back of her closet like a ghost. Sometimes, late at night, she would take it out and touch the fabric, trying to remember the feeling of triumph. But all she could summon was the cold, sickening dread that had replaced it. Olivia's final words to her echoed in her mind. When a man tells you his wife doesn't understand him, what he really means is that she understands him perfectly. Jessica had been so arrogant, so sure of her own superiority, that she had never stopped to consider the truth of that statement. She had wanted to believe Daniel was a misunderstood genius, trapped in a dull marriage. She had refused to see that he was simply a predator, and his wife was the one who knew exactly where all the traps were laid. One crisp autumn afternoon, Jessica was sitting in a small cafe nursing a cup of coffee and scrolling through job listings on a cheap laptop. A news report came on the television mounted in the corner. It was Olivia cutting the ribbon at a new women's shelter funded entirely by the Phoenix Foundation. She looked serene, powerful, and completely at peace. She was a woman who had taken control of her own narrative. A bitter wave of envy and a surprising, humbling flicker of admiration washed over Jessica. She had spent 2 years trying to steal Olivia's life, only to discover that the life she wanted was a fragile illusion. Olivia, meanwhile, had built a new life, a real one, on a foundation of truth and integrity. Jessica closed her laptop. The shame was still there, a constant, low-grade fever. But for the first time, something else was stirring within her resolve. She was a supporting character in Olivia's story, and a villain in Daniel's, but she had her own story to write from here. It would not be glamorous. It would not be easy. It would be a slow, painful climb out of the wreckage she had helped create. She left the cafe and walked out into the cool afternoon air. She didn't know where she was going, but for the first time in 6 months, she felt like she was moving forward, not just drifting in the fallout. The ashes of that night in the Starlight Room had finally grown cold, and from them a tiny, fragile ember of her own future was just beginning to glow. Olivia's story is a powerful and unforgettable reminder that the greatest strength is often forged in the deepest betrayal. She didn't just get even. She got everything, transforming her pain into a platform for empowerment that changed countless lives. It's a testament to the fact that you can't build a future on a foundation of lies, and that a woman's true power is not who she stands beside, but who she is when she stands alone. Her meticulously planned revenge on Daniel and Jessica wasn't just about justice. It was about rewriting her own destiny. If you were captivated by Olivia's incredible story of strategy and strength, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who would appreciate a story of ultimate triumph. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another tale of drama, intrigue, and karmic justice. What did you think of Olivia's methods? Let us know in the comments below.